So hello everyone, once again from the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and today what I wanted to do was kind of make a sequel to the video I made, I think it was last Monday, or maybe Tuesday, I forget which one now. And I was basically talking about the lore of Anti-SJW YouTube channels. I primarily focused upon these thumbnails they make, and primarily the women that feature in these thumbnails, and who are they, and why have they become a part of these like weird characters they put in their thumbnail to represent different things. Now go check that out if you're interested. And basically what it did was kind of recap a lot of research I've done on these YouTube channels, and this is what this video is going to be today, because I want these two videos to be kind of like good summations of both what these channels are and the history of them and why they have become like so popular in conservative circles and stuff, and how the backlash they now create to things is like very, very visible even to the companies. Like, remember the Little Mermaid trailer getting so many dislikes and downvotes pretty much just because Ariel is black, and they've whipped up this hysteria about supposed identity politics and leftist politics ruining everything. So what we're going to do in this video is, I thought would be good, is to go through kind of the history of anti-SJWs as some sort of online movement. Then I kind of want to talk about like the main channels involved and where they come from, before talking about the various controversies over the years and how that gets added to the lore. Because remember in last week's video, when I showed you that they were already trying to use Frosk, that G4 host who made this speech about sexism in gaming, and now they start using her in their thumbnails about irrelevant things that have nothing to do with her. And that is kind of what they do with these controversies. So for example, like Brie Larson made a speech about how there needs to be more diversity with film reviewers. They all went insane. And then Brie Larson gets added to all these thumbnails. The Last of Us 2 getting added to loads of weird thumbnails. Ghostbusters 2016. Ryan Johnson and all these different people. So that is what today's video is going to be about. It's going to be a sequel to the last one. And hopefully together, this will kind of cover all the bases of what anti-SJW YouTube even is for people. But like I said with last week's video, I'm going to be covering a lot of things I've covered in the past, but across like multiple videos, probably over like 10 plus videos. But if you only care about a certain controversy, just type in the Kavernacle, that controversy, and you'll probably find that video instead of watching this one perhaps. But before we go any further, please like the video, and in the comments, I'd be curious, when did you guys become first aware of anti-SJW nerd YouTube channels? I'd say for me, it would probably be with the backlash to the Force Awakens trailer. Remember when it showed obviously Finn being a stormtrooper, and they're like, how can you have a black stormtrooper? But I also remember lots of stuff towards like The Last Jedi, lots of stuff about like Ghostbusters 2016. So let me know down in the comments. Also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter while it still exists and before Elon Musk completely bankrupts the company. And also follow me on Instagram, where I'm also posting about my travels around Asia, and that is all saved in the highlight reels. And if you care about my travels, you can also become a patron, where I'm posting one exclusive patron-only video about my travels. The one about Vietnam is already up. I'm going to film my Cambodia one this month, and there's going to be like multiple videos which will be exclusive. So if you care about that stuff, consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and other benefits include getting access to my Nintendo Switch friend code and the private patrons Discord server. Also, check out the subreddit and my second channel down in the description. So before we talk about the history of anti-social justice warriors, I thought we should talk about where the term even comes from in the first place. So this is on Rational Wiki, and it says the term social justice warrior was first used as a pejorative in a blog called Social Justice Warriors Do Not Engage, launched by Will Shetterly on the 6th of November 2009. The blog was left-wing and believed that humans are currently living in post-scarcity. A post on the blog entitled The Social Justice Warrior Cult argued that SJWs function as a type of cult. The post argued that SJWs form enemies for group cohesion, that they hold beliefs they believe to be unfalsifiable, and that they become intoxicated with their beliefs to the point of elitism and cliquish behavior. On May 26, 2011, the Tumblr blog No, Tumblr SJW started with the goal of exposing Tumblr's most heinous social justice warriors. On December 22nd, 2012, the Tumblr Social Justice Warriors of OkCupid was launched to mock SJWs who were trying to get a date. So basically from there, the term started to catch on, and SJW just became a popular term to talk about the left in general. Although it did have like a popular meme stereotype of like some blue-haired lesbian feminist or something like that. And of course, all those people featured in the thumbnails I showed you last week became like these symbols of the SJW movement. But also, anti-SJW YouTube content didn't catch on this early. There was a lot of anti-feminist content. I'm going to talk about that quickly, but it didn't specifically talk about anti-SJWs as much. Now, as this little case study, I want to talk about the Quartering, who is of course like one of the main channels involved in anti-SJW content. Now, I made a whole video about the history of the Quartering's channel, and what I thought was the most interesting part is that the Quartering kind of started up as like a skeptic YouTube channel, because the Quartering was like a massive simp for Sargon of Akkad.
For me, if it was just there and didn't really do anything, I wouldn't really be that bothered. But it does have a measurable effect on the media itself. It becomes different. I mean, you were showing me the pictures of the magic cards, where like, you know, one of the bad guys is now a fat old woman.
Yeah.
Fucking terrifying boss, you know. What are her stats, you know?
Went to like fan conventions of the skeptic community featuring people like Shoe on Head and Armored Skeptic and Sargon as well. And you can kind of see this in his early content, because it is trying to be like more Sargon-like before becoming, you know, the very stereotypical content we understand today. And it also just shows something that happened in the skeptic community itself and like these atheist YouTubers, because like I said, we're going to cover a lot of previous videos I've made. The Amazing Atheist was also someone who jumped on the anti-feminist bandwagon. So for you guys who don't remember, the skeptic community were these people who would debunk things with facts and logic, and it used to kind of skew towards more debunking things to do with like Christian conservatism or just religion in general. And that's where the Amazing Atheist comes in. But what happened with the emergence of people like Anita Sarkeesian, these people started using their way of arguing against Christian conservatives, and they started applying it to feminists. And what I believe happened is a couple of these channels, like the Amazing Atheist, made this anti-feminist content, not as one-offs, but like as something they were just doing as part of their overall content. And they realized, well, this is really, really popular. People absolutely love anti-feminist content, and that is how from like 2013 onwards, a lot of people who are like atheist YouTubers or more skeptic type YouTubers, they started to become primarily anti-feminist YouTubers, and this made them very, very popular. Now, I made a whole video about the downfall of the skeptic community, because what actually happened in the end was, although all of them hated feminists, it was the rise of like Trumpism which really split this community, because people like Thunderfoot, who are like infamous for loads of their videos about Anita Sarkeesian, they're like, I'm not going along with all this Trumpism, where a lot of people like Sargon of Akkad and all these other conservative people, they're like, we are embracing this new type of far-right politics in the UK and the US. But I think that split also helped pave the groundwork for anti-SJW YouTube, which the Quartering is one of the main like characters in. Quartering really started his channel as like a, you know, mainly nerd channel, but it quickly became an anti-SJW channel. And like I said, I believe it's the skeptic shift to anti-feminism, the skeptic split between them, with one side going into the conservative direction and one of them just making, I don't know, different kinds of videos from their previous ones, which really helped give us the modern form of anti-SJW YouTube that we have today. Now, of course, the Quartering is one of the most famous channels, but these channels all have their own nuances and backstories. Like the Quartering's channel started off as something to do with like Magic the Gathering, and he's infamous in that community for being kicked out of it for harassment and stuff like that. But also he comes from the more like skeptic political angle. But then you have channels like Jeremy Griggs's Geeks and Gamers, which primarily used to be like a Star Wars channel. And that really comes out of like the Fandom Menace stuff. They've all essentially become carbon copies of each other, where they will sit and they will basically do a one-take reaction to an article they read, and it will all look the same. All their like OBS setup looks very, very similar. All their borders and stuff look very, very similar. And they'll make like a 5-minute video reading a Daily Mail article and talking about how insane X, Y, and Z is. And of course, depressingly, this content is really, really popular, despite it being absolutely low effort and terrible. I thought it'd be interesting to now go into the various controversies, because it's important to understand these controversies and how various communities all became this anti-SJW hive mind. Because like I said, the quartering and things like Geeks and Gamers, they didn't start out as the same thing, but they did become the same thing in the end. And it's also important to understand the controversies to get into the lore, because they always love to reference stuff like years after these controversies happened. So obviously I said I remember The Force Awakens, but honestly, I felt like generally a lot of people on Star Wars YouTube did actually like that movie, and there wasn't really as big a controversy as something like The Last Jedi. Although there were people complaining about Mary Sue's and forced feminism because Rey was the main character, I don't feel like it was as bad. But one of the things that really kicked off on YouTube, and ironically I don't think the Quartering or Geeks and Gamers were around for this, was of course the Ghostbusters reboot starring an all-female cast, which resulted in Leslie Jones getting a ton of racist harassment. And at this time, this kind of dogpiling was led by people like Marlo Yiannopoulos on Twitter rather than the Quartering or Geeks and Gamers. And of course what they said is basically, you're ruining our childhood by inserting identity politics into one of our beloved properties when we all know we actually want Ghostbusters free. Which makes me laugh in hindsight, because the new Ghostbusters movie was so terrible that is what they actually wanted, because they just want to be fed nostalgia and fed references. They don't actually want something new. Now, I'm not defending the Ghostbusters reboot, and as we're going to get into, I don't like a lot of these things these people don't like either. I just don't hate them for the reasons they do. Now, the thing of Ghostbusters is it's one of those films that people, I think, remember is way better than it is. And, like, honestly, do people really love Ghostbusters that much? Like, yeah, I know it's cool and it's part of your childhood, and they're solid movies and stuff. They're pretty funny, especially compared to some of the garbage we get today. But I never thought it would have this fanatical devotion to it. But what I think is, like a lot of these things, they saw fans getting mad, and then bad faith actors, conservatives, got involved to whip up hysteria against the cast and against everyone involved, because they're like, well, you're ruining it with feminist politics. And as we know, feminist politics, anti-SJWs, doesn't mean the film is talking about, I don't know, the ghost patriarchy or just talking about the patriarchal system. It's basically that because it's all women, feminism. Like, that is how they view these things. We all know it only takes like one woman in a film, let alone 4 women, to send them absolutely crazy. And also because Chris Hemsworth played like their secretary, they believe they were trying to make a point about men as well. But that was the first one I really noticed had a massive backlash. And of course, it was very, very fertile ground for like conservative YouTubers to make all this content. But it paled in comparison to how much these groups, all of them, used The Last Jedi to grift and grow their audiences. And I think The Last Jedi is very, very important when we're discussing the rise of anti-SJW YouTube channels. So, of course, we had episode 7. I thought episode 7 was okay, but very disappointing because it was so unoriginal, basically a rehash of episode 4. So then Ryan Johnson makes episode 8, The Last Jedi, and it's not what people really want. And I'll say, as someone who is a big Star Wars fan, I don't like The Last Jedi either. And I think The Last Jedi is a fine movie. I actually think it's by far the best sequels movie as well. And I think as a movie on its own, if you don't like Star Wars and you went to see that, or if you only saw the newer films, you'd probably like that, because I think it's far better. The stuff with Kylo Ren is very good. I like it when he kills Snoke. There are some redeeming things, but by and large, it just does not feel like Star Wars. In many ways, to me, it feels like a Marvel movie, especially the dialogue. So personally, I didn't like this movie at all. I feel like the whole premise of the sequels is really bad. But of course, because characters like Luke were only in it for a bit and then died in a really annoying way because it was like a fake out death, but then he died anyway. Yeah, I didn't personally like it, but I don't like it for legitimate reasons. And what I feel happened, and what I feel like was so good for anti-SJW YouTube channels, and why so many of them have their birth during the Last Jedi backlash, is because the film was so polarizing. I think a lot of people were trying to work out why they didn't like it, especially like more naive people who maybe don't have the best critical thinking skills. And they're watching that and they're like, it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. It just feels weird. Like, is this really what we're doing when we can bring back Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford? We're making these movies. And what the Anti-SJW said is, yeah, they are bad. Do you know why they're bad? They're bad because of feminism. They're bad because of left-wing politics, which I find so hilarious. And why do I say that? Because the character of Holdo, who apparently was a pink-haired lesbian feminist, they're talking about how they treated Luke, basically how all the minority cast members are the good guys and all the white men are the bad guys, apart from Luke literally being the hero again. But because Kylo Ren and Hux and stuff are the bad guys, they're saying it's meant to be a film saying that white men are bad. I kid you not, these were some of the reasons I was seeing at the time of why this film was bad. And if you guys are younger, you probably don't remember, the backlash to this movie was insane, especially on Nerd YouTube. Like, there are so many video essays of people saying everything wrong with it. But Angry Joe making like multiple videos about why he hated it and stuff. I don't think Angry Joe is the worst. He does have terrible taste, saying The Last of Us 2 and Cyberpunk 2077 are the two worst games of 2020. But he also thinks the first Suicide Squad is a good movie. But anyway, like I was saying, this stuff becomes part of the lore. So we've only spoke about Ghostbusters and Star Wars so far. But if we look at the thumbnails, even Geeks and Gamers a year ago is talking about Ghostbusters 2016. Why the fuck are these people talking about Ghostbusters 2016 in 2021? So Ghostbusters 2016 gets snapped from existence. NPC Media tries to defend Ghostbusters 2016. Okay, that's 3 years ago. 11 months ago, critics are mad that audiences love Ghostbusters Afterlife and hate the other one. Terminator Woke Fate just went full Ghostbusters 2016. She-Hulk Episode 1, Men Are Bad, Women Are the Bestest, and has a picture of Leslie Jones from Ghostbusters 2016. This is in 2022. They're still talking about Ghostbusters 2016. But like I said, I was talking about Star Wars, and this is a nice through line to our next topic, right? So like I said, The Last Jedi, insane backlash, birth of like the fandom menace in like mainstream Star Wars communities, really. And if we think the toxic reaction to Jake Lloyd in episode 1 was bad, the reaction to this was so much worse in that they forced multiple people involved in the film off social media pretty much for good. I know Daisy Ridley has recently just come back after all the harassment she got. But if you go on these channels and you see all this stuff, Geeks and Gamers, it has Star Wars, Queen Brie Larson to play Ahsoka Tano, and then we have a picture of Rian Johnson with Brie Larson. Disney wants Brie Larson to lead Star Wars now. Lol. And now they have more stuff about Brie Larson and Star Wars. Star Wars rejected Brie Larson. How could this have happened? Brie Larson joined Star Wars and is more powerful than Luke Skywalker. Media demands Brie Larson for Star Wars. Of course, this is on the quartering. And then you have Disney shuts down Brie Larson and Rian Johnson's Star Wars movie. So Rian Johnson got added to the Anti-SJW law in that they would put him in all these things with Brie Larson. Because, you know, well, everyone hates Rian Johnson for The Last Jedi. But, you know, the Brie Larson thing, we have to talk about this. And I made a whole separate video about this. Like, why is Brie Larson popping up with Rian Johnson, supposed to be in a Star Wars movie? Of course, Brie Larson has not been cast in a Star Wars movie. But this was a popular thing going around throughout the backlash to The Last Jedi and throughout the backlash to Captain Marvel. They blended these two things together where now in anti-SJW law, Rian Johnson wants to make a Star Wars film starring Brie Larson, pretty much with the goal just to piss off all the anti-SJWs. Now, why is Brie Larson hated by these people? Now, we've moved from the end of 2017, and now we're moving towards the end of 2018, after Captain Marvel got announced. Now, Brie Larson is, of course, a fairly progressive, liberal type, and that doesn't really bode well with these people. But they saw with her an opportunity to grift massively and add her to the main character of the anti-SJW law. I wouldn't say there's anyone else who compares to the hate they whipped up against her. Now, they hate her for a very, very stupid reason. So basically, I've played this clip a lot throughout my time covering this stuff. Brie Larson made a speech at some sort of event where she talked about diversity in film review circles, because she says, you know, she got her start in a small film and basically good reviews made her whole career. And she was saying that a lot of the time filmmakers make films about their own experience and it might not resonate with everybody. And then she highlighted that most film critics in America are white men. And that's not always good, because when you tell stories that are more specific to your experience and you're not a white man, it might not resonate with these critics. And critic circles should be reflective of the general US population. I don't think it is the most crazy sentiment, but I'm just going to play you a bit of the clip.
Am I saying that I hate white dudes? No, I'm not. But what I am saying is that if you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is an insanely low chance a woman of color will have the chance to see your movie and review your movie. Other people besides white dudes like Star Wars and would love the opportunity to do a set visit. And I'm also saying I don't hate white dudes. I'm just saying we need to be conscious of our bias and do our part to make sure that everyone is in the room.
But if you guys haven't heard that before, I'm sure there'll be some of you who haven't heard that before. You'll be thinking, like, what's the big deal? Come on, do you not understand the anti-SJW mindset? They feel like she was saying she hates white men and she wants to persecute white men and she's an anti-white racist, something I get called all the time despite being very pale-skinned. And they went absolutely mad about this. And that is why people like the Quartering Geeks and Gamers have made so many videos on her. And if I was her, I would seriously consider legal action against some of these people because the harassment they whipped up against her in the wake of Captain Marvel and after she said these things was absolutely insane. She launched her YouTube channel and all the comments were just from anti-SJWs and there were so many dislikes and they literally would not leave her alone. They would flood all her social media posts and oftentimes a lot of the hate directed towards her was just made up. Like you saw those Star Wars things. They're just trying to make people hate her and they're trying to grift off the hate they've created for her when she's not even involved in these things. Like there was no such thing as a Rian Johnson film starring Brie Larson in the Star Wars universe, but they're happy to do that and they don't care because they know their hateful fan base will lap this up because they've created this character just like Anita Sarkeesian back in 2013, where they really mischaracterize what she's saying, make her this boogeyman, which deserves all this insane harassment. Brie Larson is very similar in that they created this boogeyman and then they made up a load of stuff about her and then they make so many videos which just lead to so much vitriol against her. And during the height of the hysteria against her, if someone actually physically hurt her, who would you blame for creating that culture? And I actually said this with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard stuff because I was like, regardless of what you think of these things, the hatred being whipped up towards Amber Heard is absolutely insane and is so irresponsible how people are covering this trial on YouTube. If she got hurt by someone, then the responsibility would be on so many people who cover the trial in a certain way. And of course, the underlying thing to a lot of these things we've already talked about, we've talked about The Last Jedi, we've talked about Ghostbusters, we've talked about Brie Larson, and all that stuff we talked about last week is just a hatred of women. Because anti-SJWs disproportionately target women, and they love to target black women as well. I made a whole video about that too. It's pretty clear that it's mainly white, male, conservative people just basically hate any woman, and they feel entitled to dogpile her for relatively standard liberal politics. Like I said, do you think that thing I showed you really warranted an absolutely hysterical response from these anti-SJW nerds? Of course it didn't, but again, the leaders of this, for anti-SJW YouTubers, they don't care. Because at the end of the day, they create these characters, they create this fan fiction of reality, which I've said a lot of times on this channel, because it makes them loads of money, and you can keep adding things to the narrative, you can keep adding things to the lore, and people will be invested because you're making them hate people like Brie Larson in the first place, and then you just add on more and more stuff, and it just seems like she's the most terrible person in the entire world based on you mischaracterizing her and making things up. The thing that these people use is these massive controversies and backlash to really grow their own audiences and grow their channels. And that's why they've just been growing and growing and growing. And these controversies are so good for them because they can make so many videos about them. But they've created such a climate that now things don't even have to be controversial at all. And they will still make it controversial, like the Obi-Wan show, for example. And just having this villain, Reva, who was played by a black woman, and apparently it's the most controversial thing ever now. So we're moving on now to 2020, where there was another significant event for anti-SJW YouTube, and that was The Last of Us 2 and The Last of Us 2 leaks. So everyone who's watching this right now, if you haven't played The Last of Us 2, well, go play that because it's one of my favorite games. But don't watch this part of the video. There'll be timestamps down below, hopefully, and you can just click forward. I'm hopefully not going to spoil it again in the rest of the video where it's not timestamped. But basically, if we look at the thumbnails, The Last of Us 2 has been added to the lore because it comes up all the time. So Kevin Smith's He-Man might go full Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 ending, one of the worst in video game history. And then you have you have Mark Hamill there as Luke. And I guess they're comparing Joel to Luke because of the fake out of them apparently being marketed to be in their movies and games more, and they weren't. Anita Sarkeesian involved with Last of Us Part 2. Justice, after 2 years, we finally beat Naughty Dog. So like I always say, these things get added to the lore, the controversy, the backlash. So now they're saying that He-Man has pulled a Last Jedi. He-Man has pulled a Last of Us 2. Last of Us 2 has pulled a Last Jedi because apparently they can only view media in the form of like controversies they whip up about certain things. So what was The Last of Us controversy? Basically, The Last of Us Part 1, if you guys don't know, is one of the most successful PlayStation 3 games, absolutely loved by so many people, following the story of Joel and Ellie. I liked this game when it came out. I played it when it came out when I was 17, really enjoyed it, played it again when I was about 21, 22, enjoyed it even more that time, but I never had much love for the game. Like, I would never put it in my top 10, even my top 20. But I absolutely love The Last of Us Part 2, and I'll get into that in a tiny bit, just, I'll say a few words about it. But basically, people have a really unhealthy attachment to Joel for some reason. Like, Joel was a terrible guy. Very interesting character, likable character, three-dimensional character. In the world of The Last of Us even, he's not a good guy. He's a survivor, yes, but no one's going to tell you he's a beacon of morality in these very horrific times. So The Last of Us 2 is marketed as a sequel to this story. And even early on, people were speculating, well, Joel is not going to play a large role in this because it looks like Ellie is the main character. And even people were speculating that Joel is not actually alive, that Joel is dead and it's Joel's ghost talking to Ellie the whole time. Basically what Naughty Dog did, to not spoil the big twist, was they did a Metal Gear Solid 2 where, like how Metal Gear Solid trailers replaced Raiden with Solid Snake, a lot of Last of Us trailers would replace parts where Jesse was in the game with Joel so they wouldn't spoil it. But then there was a massive leak of the game, I think in April 2020, and it talked about how Joel died at the hands of a new character called Abby. Now, there were also people saying that Abby was transgender, and I think it was a misreading of the leaks that Lev, who is Abby's sidekick in certain levels, is actually the transgender one, not Abby. But this whipped up an absolute insane hysteria, and these guys grifted off it so hard. And I don't even know how I didn't get it spoiled for me, considering it was like 2 months before the game came out. And basically what they were saying is Naughty Dog hates the fans, and it's basically giving the middle finger to the fans, and it's trying to insert a feminist narrative at the expense of the men in the game. And that's why it's basically replacing Joel with Abby. And it's such a bizarre reading of the whole story. It makes me laugh so much. And you heard so much discourse about they're insulting the fans. So the writer and director of Last of Us 2 is Neil Druckmann. They started calling him Neil Cuckman. But he was one of the main people who worked on the first game, right? So he created something you love so much, and apparently he just fought for the second game. F it, I'm just gonna ruin everything and give a big middle finger to the fans of the game because I hate these characters and I hate what I created. Of course he didn't do that. And it's part of the reason why I like the game so much, because I didn't get it spoiled for me. And it massively subverted my expectations. It reminded me of Metal Gear Solid 2 in some ways, in that it gave you a massive twist early on. And it also was just so expert at playing with your emotions, because with Joel's death, you're incentivized to go on this absolute massive rampage as Ellie, not feel bad at all for all the people you kill, innocent and guilty. And then it flips the story on its head and it shows you Abby, and then you start liking Abby and her crew, but then you realize, oh, what have I done? I've killed all these people already, and now I feel like really terrible. And then you end that game thinking, well, I did at least. I like Abby the best out of everyone, and she's actually the most moral character. But like I said, people have a weird attachment to Joel, and they have a really unhealthy relationship with Joel, who is depicted as like a terrible character in that he's done so many horrible things, which is said to him by multiple characters in the first game as well. But of course, this is all fueled by misogyny, and just like even going back to the original Force Awakens, they just read like, oh, now a woman is the main character. That is a feminist narrative you've put in instead of the narrative we fans wanted. We wanted a continuation of Joel and Ellie's story. While people like me who weren't like super fans of the first one, the second one is literally one of my favorite games because it takes what the first one did well and makes it so much better. And what a fitting ending, I think, for Joel, that the last time you play as him, after all the violence you've committed in the first game, is you are literally riding off into the sunset at the start of the game with a guitar on your back. I think it's a really nice ending, personally, the last time you play as him, and I really, really like the game. But like I said, it's getting added to the lore. So what does The Last of Us 2, when they're talking about He-Man as The Last of Us 2, like that seems really bizarre. What has He-Man got to do with The Last of Us 2? What they mean is that He-Man is advertised a certain way, but the He-Man show wasn't actually about He-Man, therefore the He-Man is pulled a Last of Us 2. I do love how this becomes like the language of the Anti-SJWs, and that's why they had Mark Hamill on the Joel thumbnail, so like, oh well, Force Awakens, it was advertised as having Mark Hamill in it, and then he wasn't really in it, and it was just about Rey. But of course, when they whipped up all the hysteria about this, what happened? Mainly the actress of Abby, Laura Bailey, got absolutely insane harassment, insane allegations against her, insane allegations against Neil Druckmann saying he created a sex scene between Owen and Abby because he wanted to do a self-insert because he is such a simp for Laura Bailey. Loads of absolutely crazy stuff. Of course, a load of racism directed at Neil Druckmann as well. And it just exposed the absolute like cesspools that exist in these communities. There's even still a subreddit coping so hard about The Last of Us 2. It's called like The Last of Us 2. Go have a look if you want to see the most embarrassing man babies on the planet. But just like all the other controversies, go type this in, type in Geeks and Gamers The Last of Us 2, type in The Quartering The Last of Us 2, look at the views. They did not stop churning out content on this for so long. And even someone I know who's not really like online loads, he said, oh, isn't The Last of Us 2 meant to be rubbish? And I'm like, why do you think that? He's like, oh, loads of people saying it's crap. And I was like, yeah, you've just been reading like right-wing conservative babies. I actually got him to play it and he said it's one of his favorite games. So don't listen to the internet, especially when Anti-SJWs in bad faith are whipping up hysteria. But all of these things building on each other get added into the lore of these people, where they put it on their thumbnails, even though they have nothing to do with certain subjects, and they use it as part of their phrasing, like, oh, this thing is now The Last of Us Part 2 as well, because they hate the fans, and they just want to insert feminist narratives at the expense of male characters. So, of course, if we talk about significant controversies these people whip up, we could be here all day. But what I will say is, it felt like in the past, there were like moments across the year where these people would whip up an insane controversy. Now it feels like every week. It feels like everything now is a massive controversy. And I think it's so telling that people like The Quartering and Geeks and Gamers used to have politics channels. They don't upload on their politics channels anymore. They only upload on their main channels, which are indistinguishable from basically Fox News at this point in certain ways, because that is what they're doing. This culture war they're waging, they don't care. They don't care about something being good. They don't care about apparent like legitimate grievances. It's basically like woke is bad. So that's why you get people like mad at The Last of Us for taking like a big risk. But now they're just mad at like literally one trailer, like 1 minute trailer with Ariel from The Little Mermaid being black, and they hate it because apparently Little Mermaid's gone woke because it has a black character. Like, seriously, that's how insane they have gotten and how rabid they've gotten. And they just hate everything. They hate everything now. Like I said, used to feel like it was a couple times a year. Now it feels like every single week they're crying about anti-white racism. They're crying about woke stuff ruining their video games. But you have to understand how they got to that point. And how they got to that point was they would use these controversies to really amplify their channels and grift and really muddy the waters and really stir up hatred primarily towards women by targeting these certain things. When they see these leaks and stuff, they are rubbing their hands together. They know how much money they're making. They know how much subs they're going to get because they know how much they can grift this stuff. And even recently with Frost, which we talked about in the last video, how many videos do they make on this woman? So many. And it's actually disgusting what they do because they incite so much hatred towards these people who don't even do anything wrong for the most part, just say stuff that they don't like. But we all know if it's a man saying it, they would not go after them half as hard as women who say this stuff. So a lot of these anti-SJW channels have now gone massively mask off. They don't care. They'll platform Alex Jones. They'll all be simping for DeSantis, calling Disney groomers. They'll totally engage with this really, really hateful rhetoric. They do not care now. They don't care because they've got so many people in this ecosystem through jumping on these controversies. And what they did effectively was when something was controversial, when people weren't sure how they felt about it, like how do you feel about The Last Jedi? How do you feel about The Last of Us 2? How do you feel about something being fairly subversive? they're like, well, the reason they did that is because they hate you and they only want to use these properties to insert identity politics and leftist politics. They only care about control and conditioning. They don't care about telling a good story. So as we've seen with both these videos, the main through line for everything is that anti-SJWs really thrive on and have grown their brands through targeting women in the public eye. And most of these women both don't do anything wrong, but when they have criticisms or even express left-wing political views, they're not even that radical. Anita Sarkeesian is one, of course. Brie Larson is another. People like Frosk, that's another one. Nothing they said is radical. Nothing they said is stuff you don't hear even coming out of like people involved in like the Democratic Party in some instances. They just need to target for their hate because even if they don't really care, they know they can do this and make a lot of money and really screw the women on the receiving end of these hate campaigns and stuff because it doesn't matter to them. They know there'll be no accountability towards them. They know their fans will love them for doing this. So really, they are happy enough to target women in the nerd space. So that is it for the law of anti-SJW YouTube. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.